or any language. If we like that particular language, if we enjoy learning that language, then it becomes a comfortable activity for us. It becomes a fruitful activity for us. So reading prose creates interest in the mind of learners. It develops their imagination also. Reading, reading cultivates our mind basically. Reading gives us thoughts. Reading gives us power to think beyond the words even. So imagination is developed when we read particular prose which has those kinds of elements. Right? We can use our mind creatively in order to express our ideas, and that becomes different from the day-to-day language again. It also prepares the learner for world citizenship, because universal human values are taught directly and indirectly by the prose lessons. One of the basic intentions behind prescribing prose lessons is that apart from passing the exam, apart from learning that particular language, the students are to be made responsible citizens of the world. The universal human values are to be taught to the students. So every story has moral, and students learn those moral things. Students learn what are the values being a human being, because universal human values is the basic difference between all the living beings, because we also are animals. The only difference is that we are social animals. We stay together and we have certain values. If we lose the values, there will not be any difference between we animals and other animals. So universal human values of compassion, sympathy, kindness, these things are directly or indirectly taught to the students by the prose lessons and poems also. To mold one's character is one of the important objectives of teaching prose. Right? Next. So what are the steps in teaching prose? So students can take it as steps in learning prose, and teachers, if they are there, they can take it as teaching, steps in teaching prose. Right? So the first step in teaching prose is to introduce the lesson. Otherwise what happens, most of the teachers go into the class and start reading the lesson and telling the meaning of difficult words, and the job is over. Most of the times this happens. But the ideal way to start a lesson is to ask certain open-ended questions, not even closed-ended, which are called as icebreakers. Icebreakers can be used. So icebreakers are very simple and open-ended questions where the previous knowledge of the students can be tested regarding whatever lesson you are teaching in the classroom as a teacher. And students also can relate themselves to the lesson by recollecting the past knowledge, which is related to the topic of the prose they are expected to learn. So icebreakers make the students speak something at least. If open-ended questions are asked related to the topic before, which are called as pre-questions also, before actually the lesson is started. So these kinds of activities in the classroom make the learners also comfortable. They relate themselves to the theme of the passage, and they also start taking interest in whatever the teacher has started reading. Right. So using icebreaker in the introduction itself is one of the good strategies to start teaching prose and to start learning prose also. Second step is teaching structures. As I was talking about, it gives exposure to the language. So what kind of exposure we get? We get to read, we get to listen to the sentences which we have never heard before while we are reading prose and poems. We get to listen to the structures which are totally new for us. So these kinds of structures should be properly understood. Patterns of the words, patterns of the phrases should be properly understood so that we can use those structures in our life. Otherwise what happens, we are able only to create certain simple sentences in English. But apart from basic structures, there are a number of derived structures in English which makes our language more attractive, which makes our language more interesting. Right. So those structures we are expected to learn from the passage. It also enables them to use similar structure in different context. The structures which we study through these prose, we can use in our day-to-day life also. It is not that we have to listen to the sentences, we have to read the sentences and we have to forget them. No. If we really, as a student, if we really want to speak using English as a language, we have to remember the new structures that we get to listen, we get to read out of prose. Then third step is dividing text into smaller units. So why this is necessary? Because most of the times the prose lessons that are introduced may be lengthy, may run over 5-6 pages also. So splitting that particular lesson into 4-5 parts based on the theme. While reading also you people can do this. You split that particular story logically into certain parts and you read those parts separately. Teacher also can do the same thing. Split the lesson into 3-4 parts and focus on the first part in the first lecture, second part in the second lecture, so that the meaning of the overall text is understood by the learners and their interest also is maintained. Splitting also has one more importance, that it makes teaching as well as learning interesting. Because lengthy passages, lengthy prose may create a lack of interest among the students. It may result in tiresome kind of activity. So splitting the lesson into various parts while reading also and while teaching also is one of the strategies that can be effectively employed while teaching prose lessons. Teaching vocabulary. So when we teach a particular passage to the students, we are not simply focusing on the meaning or structures, we should focus on the vocabulary items also. The new words which students get to listen to for the first time should be identified by the teacher. Teacher should make a list of new words or at least make underline to the new words which may be difficult for the student to understand. So at this particular level, second year level, it is even possible that the meanings of the new words can be dictated by the teachers so that student can remember the meanings. Because the meanings of the new words can be remembered more effectively in the context. And that is why it is said that dictionaries are not to be read. Dictionary is not for reading. Dictionary is a reference book. If you are reading something else, for example, if you are reading a prose lesson in this particular book and if you get a new word which you have not heard before and you don't know the meaning of that word, so dictionary should be handy. Nowadays you have dictionaries in your mobile phones also. So it's a good habit that when you come across a new word, you refer to dictionary and understand, try to understand the meaning. Don't try to remember the meaning, try to understand the meaning of that word in that particular context so that that word will go into the active vocabulary folder in your brain. And in this way your vocabulary also can be increased. The next step in teaching prose is model reading by teacher. So reading comprehension includes reading as the basic activity and comprehension is the next step. When you read something for the first time, it is not always possible that you have understood everything. Comprehension is the advanced step basically. Reading is basic thing. So when teacher reads the passage in the classroom, it is necessary for the students to listen carefully because teacher, so testing the comprehension. So you can ask certain open-ended question initially and then close-ended questions can also be asked in order to encourage the learners. It is not possible that the closed-ended questions are answered by the students. Closed-ended questions sometimes discourage the student because they have to give pointed answers. Open-ended questions are preferred, at undergraduate level more than closed-ended. Like what you have understood from the lesson is an open-ended question, right? So whatever understanding of the students can speak at least 2-3 sentences. right? So open-ended questions can be asked initially, and when you are testing the students formally, then you can ask the closed-ended questions also, which have exact, precise or specific answer. Next please. So the first unit in your syllabus was teaching prose, and the second unit is poetry, and we are going to discuss in brief some of the strategies that we can use while teaching poetry and what poetry actually is. You are well aware with the definition of poems, which I will not repeat, but Robert Frost has said somewhere, poetry begins in delight and ends in wisdom. If anybody is asked whether you like to read a prose or a poem, obviously maximum number of people, may they be students or may they be teachers, they will say that I like reading poems, right? Because poetry begins in delight. When we start reading a particular poem, daffodils for example, which is prescribed in your syllabus, when you start reading daffodils, you start feeling happy, flowers everywhere and all those things. You start feeling happy, right? And when you read the poem with comprehension, okay, when you have understood the essence of the poem, at the end of the exercise, right, because poetry begins in delight, or when we start reading a particular poem, daffodils for example, which is prescribed, that is what Frost says, in your syllabus begins in delight. When you start reading daffodils, and once you start feeling happy, the poem everywhere, you become a changed man. You start feeling happy. You become wise in the sense that when you read the poem from that with comprehension, okay, poems. When you have poetry should the essence of the poem, the heart of the reader. At the end of the exercise, it emerges from the heart of the art. When we start reading the connection between daffodils, for example, heart to heart, poetry emerges from hearts in delight. When you start reading daffodils, you start feeling happy. Reach your heart, not your brain. You become wise. And when you read the poem with comprehension, poems. When you can understand the poem, but understanding of at the end of the exercise, it emerges because the language is also when you start reading the language, for example, which is when you can understand science in the life, when you start reading it is said that prose is happy, you understood because prose gives you information. You become wise, poetry is based on appreciation. We should be able to understand. We should be able to point out the nuances at the end of the poetry. We should be able to enjoy the language of poetry because there are a number of features in poetry which we do not have in prose. So therefore, it's a heart-to-heart kind of communication. It emerges from heart and you should reach the heart of the reader. Then only the intention of the poet should be affected. This is what is the highest form of literary expression, as we are aware with the fact that our history also was being written in poetry, in the form of poetry. The epics that we read nowadays are basically written in the form of poetry. So poetry is the oldest and holiest forms of poetry, of literature. When we want to pray to our God, it is poetry that comes to our lips, right? It is not prose, because prayers are in form of poetry. So poetry is the holiest and the highest form of literary expression basically. And therefore, we need a different kind of approach, different kind of mindset and different skills in order to appreciate, evaluate and understand poetry. So poetry also has aesthetic effect on human mind. So poetry makes us happy. Even if all of you, even the teachers might have experienced the fact that it is not only a love song or love poem that makes us happy. It is a sad song also, which has aesthetic effect on our mind. When we listen to a sad song sung by Kishore Kumar, it refreshes our mind. Though the thought is sad. That is the power, that is the magic of poetry. And that is why we listen to the sad songs also, no? Otherwise, nobody would have listened to the sad songs. Song is a poem, right? So, it gives details about the fact, as prose gives details, but The details are presented in different manner, as I have already told you. It has a rhythmic form, right? It has a musical quality, which most of the times prose lacks. So every poem is a piece of literature. So poem may run for 14 lines, no? For example, sonnet which you are going to study runs for 14 lines only. It has only 14 lines. So somebody can say how a thought can be presented in 14 lines. In a structured manner even. The first 2 lines should have this particular thought and final 2 lines also should have this particular conclusion. So it's a structured kind of thing. But still, it's a piece of literature. A simple 14-line poem can be appreciated in 10-15 pages. And even differently by different 10-15 people. They can apply their own understanding. Every person may appreciate a poem differently. Right. So it's a separate form of literature. It's a piece of literature. It should not be the case that the poem is short, so how we can appreciate it, or how it is called, can be called as a piece of literature, because novel runs for 500 pages. And novel is also work of literature, and poem also is a work of literature. So this difference is because language in poetry is called as language charged with meaning. The language that a poet uses is the language that is filled with meaning up to the brims. By using possible fewest words, the poet tries to convey maximum amount of meaning. That is the beauty of poems. And that is why it is possible that every person may have different perception of the same poem. Right. So it's a piece of literature basically. The aim of teaching poetry is, one of the aims basically is to develop the taste of poetry among the learners also. Because poetry and prose essentially differ in the aesthetic effect that creates on our mind. So learning poems creates a kind of taste for poetry in the minds of students also and teachers also. Rhyme and rhythm play a dominant role in poems. Exception only is free verse where the poet does not take care of any rhyme or rhythm. Otherwise, poetry is a well-structured piece of literature. There are rules and regulations. If you want to write a sonnet, you have to put your thought in that particular structure. If you want to write an elegy, you have to mold your thought in such a way that it should match that particular form. Prose is more free when we compare prose with poetry, because it has rhythm, it has rhyme scheme. If you are reading a sonnet, you will notice the peculiar rhyme scheme of that particular sonnet, which is different from poet to poet. Loud reading is required for the poem, because if the poem is read silently, then there may not be any difference between poem and a prose lesson. So poetry is to read aloud. It is read aloud, and we can enjoy poems only if it is read like a poem. Otherwise, what happens most of the times, we read poem like a prose lesson. So it does not create any effect. Right? You might have heard poems recited by famous poets. Like there is one Kumar Vishwas in Hindi poetry nowadays. So the words are the words that we use in our day-to-day life, but the way they read those words, the way they present, the way they apply international patterns to the poems, make it more effective. So poems are not to be taught, as we have already discussed, they are to be appreciated and enjoyed. Main focus of the poem is on the theme of that particular poem. Unless and until we understand the central idea of the poem, we cannot enjoy the poem. Reading the poem line by line is not the task that is expected. We have to understand the central idea, and then it gives us a new approach to look at the same poem once again, where we understand the central idea of the poem. Then we need to explain the peculiarities of literary language, stylistic devices. One of the basic differences between day-to-day language or standard language and language of literature is the use of figurative language, use of stylistic devices. which are to its maximum in poetry. So if we want to appreciate poetry, we should have certain knowledge. Being a teacher also, I should have certain knowledge of the stylistic devices, and I should transfer this knowledge of the stylistic devices to the student community so that they also get a different kind of approach to look at the same words, right? So stylistic devices include figures of speech also. Simile, metaphor are very common things, but we should go beyond that so that student can enjoy poetry as a separate piece of literature. There are patterns of sound that are used. Repetition also adds meaning, right? Saying never at one time and saying never thrice is different, because the same word is repeated enhances the beauty, enhances the quality, and enhances the import of meaning of that particular poem, right? So patterns of sound, repetition, assonance, consonance, all those things should be understood by the teacher first, and he should be able to explain these things to the students. So stylistic devices are one thing which we should have understood before we learn poetry. Otherwise there will not be any difference between teaching poetry and prose lessons. Learners need to learn how to appreciate than to understand it like a story. So that is why I was saying there is difference between understanding a story, a lesson, and appreciating a poem. The thing which we basically do is we try to understand the poem and write the thing which we should have understood before we learn poetry. Otherwise there will not be any difference between teaching poetry and prose lessons. Learners need to learn how to appreciate than to understand it like a story. So that is why I was saying there is difference between understanding a story, a lesson, and appreciating a poem. The thing which we basically do is we try to understand the poem and write the thing which we should have understood before we learn poetry. Otherwise there will not be any difference between teaching poetry and prose lessons. Learners need to learn how to appreciate than to understand it like a story. Duty of that particular teacher. Next please. So there are certain aspects which contribute to the meaning of a poem. So when we read any particular poem for the first time, there are a number of things, number of questions in our mind. There are a number of things which contribute actually to the meaning of a poem. Because 14 language can be explained into 1000, 14 lines can be explained into 1000 lines, even more than that, a sonnet, right? So how is it possible that that much amount of meaning is filled in 14 lines, for example? Because there are certain aspects which contribute to the meaning. And the first aspect is there are words which are very carefully chosen by the poet. One poem of 14 lines to write, it may take 2-3 months or 6 months or even more than that for a poet to write 14 lines poem. Because it's an intellectual kind of exercise. The poet chooses word, the poet eliminates words, chooses new words, finds perfection. So there are the words carefully and skillfully chosen by the poets which contribute to the meaning of the poems. Sometimes the poet uses ordinary words, but those ordinary words contribute to the essence of the poem because the words are used in such a way, the words are used such skillfully by the poet that they do not seem ordinary. We can recite some lines from a poem written by, S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. No, water, water everywhere. No, water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by, S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. No, water, water everywhere. No, water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So we also can say water is everywhere. And S.T. Coleridge has said water, water everywhere. He has repeated the simple word twice. Lines from a poem written by S.T. Coleridge. You might have heard the name, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. Now water, water everywhere. Now water is very common word. No, we cannot live without water. Water is everywhere. So that we can appreciate, understand the poem to the fullest. Structure of the poems also contribute in the meaning. Structure of the poems also gives a kind of aesthetic quality to the poem. How it looks on a piece of paper, how it is printed, whether the lines are lengthy or short lines are there, whether the peculiar use of punctuation mark is done, whether commas are used or not used at the end of the line, whether each line of the poem is a complete sentence or one sentence is divided into two, three lines, which is called as enjambment or run-on line. So these things, contribute in the overall quality of that particular piece of literature. You might have read certain poems, and every poem is different in length. Every poem contains different number of lines. Every poem has different type of lines. Some poems may have short lines, some poems may have long, lengthy lines. So why this is done by the poet? These things are intentionally done. The lines are short not because the poet lacks words or the poet lacks number of pages. It is because he intentionally wants to keep the lines of the poem short. Because the brevity is one of the features of poems. Right. So the structure of the poems, whether it has 10 lines or whether it has 14 lines, also adds to the meaning of that particular poem. Patterns of sound also are used, as we were talking about it. Repetitions are there. Sometimes patterns of sound like assonance, consonants are used. Water, water everywhere is an example of consonants where wo, and not a drop to drink, do is repeated, which gives a musical kind of quality to the poems, which is basically the nature of the poem. So while teaching prose and poetry, these are some of the steps which can be followed. There may be different methods also of teaching prose and poetry, but these are the things which I thought that I should discuss with you people, and students, if they are present, I was thinking that they also might get some insights out of that, how to read prose and poetry. Then the third unit in your syllabus is teaching grammar and vocabulary. So teaching vocabulary is an indirect method of teaching any language actually, and the modern grammarians say that grammar should not be taught, grammar should be learned, right? So rules of grammar, if somebody starts teaching you, do you enjoy rules of grammar and patterns of tenses and all? We don't enjoy because it doesn't have any story, it doesn't have humor. So teaching grammar is a tedious thing actually, and that is why learners also do not learn so many things by teaching rules of grammar. But still, because we are following certain method of teaching, certain format of teaching, we are still teaching grammar to the students, because our students also are not exposed to language to that extent that grammar should not be taught, it should be learned, right? And vocabulary also. So there are 2 units of vocabulary in your syllabus and 2 units of grammar. Next. So the first unit in vocabulary is prefixes and suffixes. So English or any language is a living language, living thing. So English also is a dynamic. Living things have certain qualities, no? Living things get birth, living things die also, and living things grow also. Language has all these qualities. In English there are certain number of words, whatever exact number I don't know, because every day new words are being added into English as a language. English gets in touch with all the languages all over the world, so it borrows words from other languages. English has become one of the richest languages all over the world now. When we appreciate English as one of the richest languages, it does not mean that other languages are not rich. Marathi also is a rich language. Hindi also is a very sweet language. But when we focus on English as a lingua franca, as I was telling you, English is growing every day in very fast manner compared to other languages. This is the only difference. Every language grows, but English grows somewhat faster because of the exposure it gets all over the world. So it borrows words from other languages also, and there are words created from the words which exist in the language. It is not always possible to borrow from other languages. So in English the words are created by adding particles to the words which already exist in the language, which are called as affixes. So in English, when we teach suffixes and prefixes to the students, as a teacher of English, I feel that we are doing injustice to the student, because we are teaching them suffixes and prefixes when they lack in vocabulary. And I am happy that we have inserted vocabulary units in this particular. But teaching suffixes and prefixes is a kind of advanced stage, and that is why I think it is introduced in senior college. So affixes are of 3 types we need to tell the students. One is prefix, another is infix, and third one is suffix. Infixes are limited, so they create limited number of words. They do not create words, actually they bring about the changes in the words. That's why affixes are sometimes neglected as not so important parts in vocabulary building. So affixes are like when we convert man to plural. Pen is converted, I am asking to the students, pen is converted into plural as pens, right? And man, men, right? Woman, women. So we don't add any suffix or prefix when we convert man to men or woman to women, right? So what we do is we add infix when we bring about change in the middle of the word somewhere in order to change the number. of particular noun, then it is called as infix, which is not a part of our syllabus. We are expected to learn two types of affixes only. One is prefix, another is suffix. Do you know what is prefix and suffix, students? Are there any students? Teachers or students? Because now, students, okay, good. Prefix, have you come across this word before? Prefix and suffix? I think this is from the third semester. No? You might have studied it. Prefix is a particle or part of a word that is added at the before the root word. No, there is a root word which is the basic word. So when we want to create a new word, we add a particle at the beginning of the root word. So that particle is prefix. And when we add certain particle at the end of the word, then that is suffix, right? So we create new words by adding suffixes and prefixes. We change form of certain words by adding prefixes and suffixes. Based on that, there are types of prefixes and suffixes. No? Prefixes can be, prefixes as well as suffixes are derivational. They are derivational basically. Means they derive new word. When we add a prefix or suffix to a root, a new word is created. Sometimes the class is maintained, sometimes the class also is changed. So based on that, there are class maintaining derivational prefixes and class changing derivational prefixes. Examples are given. See, there are negative prefixes which do not change the class of the word. They simply change the meaning of the word. Class remains the same. Prefixes like un or im, un, they simply make the word positive, negative from the basically positive word. So these types of suffixes are class maintaining suffixes. We use these suffixes in our day-to-day life also, no? This is impossible, we say in very simple sentence. So possible is the root word. When we add impossible, the opposite word is created, but the possible is an adjective, impossible also is an adjective. So class is not changed. Therefore it is class maintaining. And in class changing, noun is converted into verb or verb is converted into noun and so on. For example, there are verb forming prefixes like n, en. So danger is basically, it can be used as noun also and it can be used as adjective also. When we add en, then it becomes endanger. When we add em to power, which is a noun, can be converted into verb. So class of the word is changed. And therefore it is called as class changing derivational suffix. Right. So suffixes can be, prefixes can be of two types. And the exhaustive list of the prefixes has been given in the textbook that is provided to you. Now in the soft copy, after some days you will receive the hard copy of the textbook of English, where the exhaustive list of the prefixes with their meanings, every prefix has specific meaning, right? Like there are negative prefixes or verb forming prefixes. Next please. Then second affix is suffix, which is important. How many more minutes I can take? Okay. What time, or I can continue with? Okay. Because it's a Herculean task, a marathon kind of thing for me to complete the total syllabus in 1 hour, and I have got more than less than 1 hour actually. So let us see. You please tell me when I have to stop.
Okay, sir. Actually, we are running out of time.
Oh, that's fine.
But sir, your lecture is.
So it's okay. There is no any problem. You tell me any point that sir you have to stop, because I know practically it is not possible, and I know the fact that we are actually running out of time.
Okay. Just
so at any point of time you can signal me. I'll wind up my presentation.
Just focus on main topics. Please go ahead.
Fine. Right. So suffixes also are class changing, class maintaining and inflectional. So I will tell you the difference only and then we'll move forward. Inflectional suffixes do not create any new word, but class changing and class maintaining suffixes create new word. Right. Inflectional suffixes simply inflect the word. They bring about the change in the noun. If noun is singular, we make it plural. So plural suffixes are there, which are called as inflectional suffixes. We convert verb from present to past, right? So past forming suffixes are inflectional suffixes. We have possessive suffix also, which we call apostrophe s. So that is also an inflectional suffix, which do not create new word. Bring about change in the number of word, bring about change in the tense of the word, right? When we think of number and tense, then number and tense for the noun and verb are again different. Actually, we are lacking time, otherwise we might have. So derivational, class changing, class maintaining, as it was in the case of prefixes. Only the difference is inflectional suffixes also are there, a new type. Next please. Then the next unit in grammar is use of tenses or usage of tenses. So what is the prerequisite for usage of tenses or uses of tenses? Both the things mean the same. The prerequisite is that you should know, students should know the patterns of the tenses. And I think in the first year you have studied patterns of the tenses. So the prerequisite has been fulfilled. So you are ready to learn the usage of the tenses, of all the types of tenses. The more common mistakes which Indian students and not only student, teachers also make is regarding subject verb concord. So we should be aware, or I should ask myself and my students before I start teaching usage of tenses, whether you know the pattern of tenses. If yes, it's okay. Whether you are aware with the subject verb concord, subject verb agreement, because this is the area where Indians are more tend to commit mistakes. Indian students also and teachers also. Anybody who speaks English in India makes maximum mistakes in subject verb concord. So this table, which is very basic, should be taught within 10 to 15 minutes to your students before you actually start teaching them how to use particular tense in particular situation. Because usage of the tenses implies creating sentences, framing simple sentences in particular situation, following the rules. A simple present tense is used in so and so situation. Present continuous is used in so and so situation. Pattern is this, and these are the rules. So we are expected to teach students to form simple sentences which they can relate themselves with. The sentences from the topics can be chosen so carefully that students should feel one with those sentences. They should be able to relate themselves with these sentences. So while giving examples to the students also, we can take it as a best practice that we can create sentences from the incidents, events or things which are related to student life, so that they can relate more to the examples, and once the example they have understood or they can understand the example, then the pattern also is unknowingly stored in their brain. Right, next please. Next thing is phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs also are of three types. Phrasal verb is a combination of verb with either preposition or adverb or sometimes both. So phrasal verbs are basically used in order to convey some different meaning which may not be there in the original verb. When we use a particular verb with in combination with a particular preposition, the original meaning of that verb may be completely lost and we might be using it with certain different meaning. So we are expected to tell these nuances in using phrasal verb to our students. Two types of phrasal verbs which are separable and inseparable, because we can insert certain words between the verb and preposition also sometimes, like in the first example, And like in the second example, we have to use the phrasal verb in pair. We cannot separate them. We cannot insert any other element between the verb and the preposition or adverb, whatever is used. So phrasal verb is one of the important topics in grammar, which actually we are expected to learn in detail, because they give a kind of they add a kind of quality to our speech. Because see, these phrasal verbs have different meanings. Give up is used, quit also can be used, sacrifice also can be used. Then why to use give up? So in order to make our speech somewhat different from others, we can use phrasal verbs with the same word. Language has the substitute for phrasal verbs also, or even we can say vice versa. Phrasal verbs have been created in order to substitute certain day-to-day words, in order to bring variety, in order to avoid monotony, in order to avoid repetitions of the same words again and again. Phrasal verbs have been formed, we can say. So phrasal verbs have been prescribed for your study. The detailed study material have been provided in your textbook with example. So what is necessary here from the point of view of teacher is, we should be able to teach students to use these phrasal verbs in their day-to-day life when they create simple sentences using English. And it is very easy also. I am searching for a good pen, you say. Instead of that, it is possible that I am looking for a good pen. You are using a phrasal verb, right? So these simple sentences should be formed by the students, and then only we can say that the intention behind prescribing this unit has been reached or fulfilled. Next. The next unit in grammar is adverbials. So adverbial, the word itself is self-explanatory. Adverb. Now it adds something to action. So what does it add? It gives a kind of extra circumstantial information about the action that is happening. So extra circumstantial information can be anything like time of the action. So when the action was performed. Extra circumstantial information may be like place of the action, answer to the where, right? So based on that, there are types of adverbs which we are expected to teach our students, and more than that, we should be able to teach our students how to use those adverbs in our day-to-day life, how to use those adverbs in our speech as well as our writings. So these are the types of adverbs taxonomy which we are expected to learn. Adverbs of manner, time, place, frequency, reason, and apart from these types, we cannot compare adverbials of degree with other types of adverbial, because that is totally different. Degree adverbs simply bring about the change in the degree of intensity of adverbial or maybe adjective, right? So degree adverbs also, how they bring about change in the meaning of the words or the overall meaning of the sentence also. For example, when you say the question is easy, and if you say the question is very easy, there is some difference in the meaning, no? What is the difference? The intensity of the easiness is increased when you use easy, and that is why they are called as degree adverbs. They bring about the change in the intensity of the meaning of adverb or adjective. Next. Then let us move on to teaching communication skills. 6 communication skills have been prescribed for both the semesters, and those communication skills can be grouped into 2 groups. Next. 2 categories can be broadly formed based on what type of skill is focused. So in these 2 communication skills, interview skills and group discussion, speaking is the skill that is given more focus. And in these 4 skills, writing skill has been given more focus. But as we have already said, that no skill can be learned or taught. No skill can be learned and no skill can be taught in isolation. All the 4 skills can be are basically complementary to each other, right? They can be learned at the same time. We cannot say I am going to learn speaking only now. I am not going to learn anything else. No, not possible. You have to listen, you have to read, and then only you can speak in a better way, right? So teaching interview skills actually is a broad topic where there are a number of skills that you are expected to learn being a student of English, because you are going to face interview when you get a degree and go out into the market with a piece of paper in your hand. That is mark sheet, because mark sheet is very attractive nowadays. Nowadays, very easily you get 70, 80% marks. No, how many students are there who have received 80% marks in BA first year? There may be some students here in the crowd. So it has become very easy to get maximum marks. Therefore, our mark sheets are very attractive. But when we face interview, then we face the difficulties. 90% marks we have knowledge also. I am not blaming you, or I don't say that you don't have knowledge. You have got 90% because you are sincere, you are very clever, right? That is why. But when it comes to expressing your knowledge using English as a language, then we face difficulties being a student. So what can be done is, there are certain tips and certain skills, certain types of interview. Theoretical things we'll skip and we'll go to the next slide. Types of interviews and modes of interview. So these are the types of interview. Out of these interviews, it is the panel interview which is the maximum, which is the practice that is used by maximum number of organizations for the selection of candidates. Because in panel interviews, multiple skills of the candidate are tested by many people, because panel includes more than 2, 3, 4, 5 people belonging to different sectors. So they may have different skills themselves. So they can test those skills in the candidate. So panel interviews are widely used. Other types of interviews also are used. You can read those types from your textbook. Next. So what are the skills basically when we face interviews actually? So it is necessary that we should carry out certain research. We should be prepared for the interview. Carrying out the research does not mean to go into the library and sit for hours and write a thesis. It does not mean that. Carrying out research simply means, if you are applying for a certain position in a particular field, you get at least basic knowledge of that particular position regarding the responsibilities and roles. You get basic knowledge of the field in which you are applying for the interview, because the questions will be based on that. If you are applying for a teacher and facing interview to be a teacher, you should know something about the pedagogy or teaching techniques. You should know something about how colleges are run and all, right? So that is called research. We should be prepared to face certain more likely questions. Like, say something about yourself. We should be prepared for that, no? Most of the times you have presented your documents, so these people know your name. So it is not necessary to tell your name. You can directly start speaking theoretically about yourself, about your qualifications and experience and all those things, right? So you should be prepared for some likely questions, like what experience you have, or what knowledge, what kind of degrees you have received in that particular field, which may be desired for that particular post. Then communication skills, no? Without communication skills, and most probably this is the point where we are lagging behind, and our students also are lagging behind. As I was talking about it before a couple of minutes, if we cannot express our knowledge properly, we have knowledge but we lack expressing knowledge in precise manner. So we have to learn that. We have to learn how to express. We have to learn how to respond. We have to learn how to respond, give positive response, how to give quick responses without creating any offensive kind of reactions. Even if we don't know the answers to certain questions, we should know how to answer these questions tactfully. Being tactful is one of the keys in communication skills. Instead of keeping mum when we don't know the answer, we can beat around the bush. But beating around the bush does not mean telling lies. It should be something related to the question that is asked, or to be more polite and to be more truthful, we can say the fact that I don't know. If you cannot, if you don't listen to the question, you cannot respond properly. So, in order to be a good speaker, as I have already told you, you should be a good listener also. Right? That is why the skills go hand in hand. Critical thinking also is necessary, because when questions are fired from the side of interviewers, we are at the receiver's end. And until and unless we analyze the question properly, understand the question properly, we cannot give logical answers. And the answers which are expected, desired by the interviewers. Next. The next important interview skills is problem solving. We should be able to prove, or we should be able to persuade those people to think that this is the right candidate because he can solve problems. Our approach should be such in answering the question that it should assure the interviewers that yes, this can be the right candidate, he can solve problems also. So problem solving skill is very necessary, because sometimes hypothetical problem can be given to the interviewee. A hypothetical, imaginary problem can be given. This is the situation, how you will handle this problem. So at that particular time, if you have problem solving skill, then you can say that this can be the solution to this problem, which might impress the interviewers. We should have flexibility and adaptability, because when we go for an interview, we are in different situation, in different background, in different atmosphere. Ambience is totally different, so we get most of the times confused. So we should be able to adjust ourselves to the changing situations. We should be able to adapt to the changing situations. Then only we can feel comfortable, and once we feel comfortable, we can face the interview confidently. Right? Then we should have teamwork ability also, because sometimes the jobs that you are applying for may be the jobs which require for teamwork skills, which require for you to work in a particular team. So they will observe your skill of working with others also. They will ask these types of questions also. So we should be ready for that. Leadership skills also will be observed, whether you can take initiative, whether you have that qualities to be a good leader, will be observed by the interviewer. Next. There are certain interview techniques actually which are included in this particular unit, but which are a part of our life. They are not for examination or something like that. Grooming is a very important thing, no? When you appear for an interview, what kind of clothes you should wear is grooming. What kind of shoes you should wear, what should be your hairstyle, what type of spectacles, glasses if you have, you wear. So grooming refers to overall appearance. Most important thing is your dress. So what type of dress is preferred when you appear for an interview? Students, what type of dress you will wear? Red shirt you will wear, no? And red shirt and yellow pant will be good for interview, no? Right? So clothes should be formal, no? You should not go wearing a t-shirt, because that is informal kind of attire. So what is preferred is dark colored pant, may be black or blue, and a shirt which is faint in color is preferred. So it creates a positive kind of picture. You may wear a tie also. That is what is grooming. Preparation and being punctual, so reaching on time. Body posture speaks a lot about your personality. Whether you are sitting or whether you are standing. Right, it gives vibes, positive or negative, to the person who is observing you. And interviewers observe you always. Okay, so that is what I was waiting for. So body posture is very important. We have to speak clearly so that your responses are properly understood. Be respectful and being courteous. Being courteous means what? How to be courteous? So how to be polite? So politeness is reflected from your personality, from your behavior, the way you greet those people, the way you stand in front of them, the way you sit, the way you walk. So all those things reflect. Body speaks more than words. And when the candidate enters the examination hall, the interview starts before asking question itself, because they observe the body language of the candidates. Next. So these are the do's and don'ts of group discussion, which is one communication skill in your syllabus. Next. What are the parameters? Group discussion is judged by the observer. So what are the parameters based on which group discussion is judged? Should be known to the people who are the participants in group discussion, right? So once we know the parameter, we can behave accordingly, right? Next. Communication skills focusing on writing. Yes, skip. So writing review, you have two types of reviews, book review and film review. Film reviews you might be reading somewhere in the newspapers and all. Book reviews also are there. If you read Marathi newspaper Sakal, you may read some book reviews in Sakal Saptang every Sunday, or in Times of India or Indian Express also there are book reviews you can read. Theoretical information is given in the textbook. Next. But there is basic difference between book review and film review, because in book review you are reviewing from different parameters, and film is being reviewed by different parameters by professionals. So our film review will not be considered by anybody, it will be for getting marks only. So this is the structure of book review, which is given in your textbook. So next. Film review. Next. These are the things, actually key terms which you should know, because you have to use these key terms in your film review. These terms. Most of the terms we know: plot, subplot, protagonist, hero we call, antagonist, villain, character, actors, father, mother roles are there. Then direction we know, cinematography is the job of a cameraman we know, editing we know, composition or music direction we know, lyricist is the person who writes the songs, choreography, dance director, screenplay is the flow of events, how events will be organized by the editor is called as screenplay, and then we have actual dialogues also. Next. Now skip to the final slide. Précis writing is also one of the important thing. Précis is a French word, no, which means summary in English. But still there are certain differences between précis and summary, which you are expected to write. Next. Essay writing, and then you have blog writing. So types of essays will be asked for examination, and then you have blog writing, last one. Blog is like a web page or website where you also can have, students also can have, and most of the students have their own blogs, right, where they can write about their thoughts. Next. Soft skills. Next. So let's go to thank you. So thank you very much for your patient listening for I think more than 1 hour. I am grateful to SB's Advocate College for inviting me as a resource person. I am honored and I am happy to be with all of you. Thank you so much. I think if there are some questions we can take, but we are already running out of time. It's up to you.
Thank you, sir. A very detailed explanation with